Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph Podcast. I am your host, Jackson Rudolph, and we're getting the show started a little bit early tonight. Quick housekeeping first is that I realized over the last few episodes that I was really trying to stick to this format of like doing news at the top of the show and then having like a nice formatted podcast. But then I realized that that's super awkward when you have a guest and they're just sitting there listening to me give like whatever sport karate news. So we're jumping straight into it tonight. We've got a sport karate legend and innovator, one of kind of the intermediate innovators of tricking, I would say. You had that first wave of the trickers in sport karate. That was your Carmichael Simons and everything like that. That very next generation that came and helped step things up to another level, that is Daniel Sterling. He was known for Forms and Weapons, a member of Team Paul Mitchell. I always love going back, watching the tapes of not only his solo forms, but also the sync forms that he did with Matt Immig. So I am a huge Daniel Sterling fan, so it's an honor to have you on the show, man. And I'll let you give our Black Belt Magazine audience a little bit more of a personal introduction.
Oh, man. I mean, that's a lot. So, yeah, I'm Daniel Sterling. Man, a lot. There's so much because there's so much. But, you know, I did sport karate for a good about 10 years, I want to say, or so of my life. A lot of local competitions that led to NASCA. I've been on several teams, from Karate Cares to Straight Up to creating my own team to Paul Mitchell. Yeah, man, I've been through a lot of international travel because like that came out big when the internet got big, right? So then I was probably in that first wave of that, you know. I don't know, man. I've done a lot.
That's awesome. And I want to pick up on that because I know that's not something that we necessarily plan to talk about a whole lot on the show. But like when you had your own team, I think it was just Team DS, right? And at one point, Matt Immig was on that team, right? Let's take a quick aside, maybe talk about that just a little bit.
Sure. So the original DS team was me, Matt, and Will, right? And then from there, it grew. And it kind of got started just on a whim, honestly, right? So, like, I was on Karate Cares and I went to Straight Up. And then from Straight Up, I started my own team, right? My goal was always to be on Paul Mitchell. Like, everyone, like, all guys who know me, like, from the moment I decided to do sport karate, it was like, I'm going to get on that team. I don't know how, but I'm going to get on that team. But I had these, like, you know, these checkpoints. So, yeah, DS got started, and it was just my friends, man. It was me, Matt, Will. Quickly grew, you know, because we were having so much fun. And I think that was something different about our team is that, man, we were just having fun, you know, like the same guys that were like, you know, we all were in New York at the time. So, you know, we trained all the time. We hung out all the time. So, I mean, it was just a group of guys and we were like, hey, man, let's just do this thing on our own. And I was working at a karate school and they kind of sponsored us for a little bit. And then that fell through. But I'd already like promised these guys like, hey, man, you're good for the year. Like, you know, I'm going to take care of you. So I actually ended up just working harder, working more hours and then finishing their sponsorship out of my own pocket. They probably like Will probably doesn't know to this day that I did that. But Matt, he didn't learn it for like years later. Even his mom, she had no idea. Like one day she heard me talking to someone about it and she was blown away by the fact that I did that. But, you know, like Matt's just like my little brother. For all my sport karate career, I'd say Matt's been my little brother somehow. Because it's weird because like for me, I was looking up to Matt even though I was like 10 years older than him, right? Like I was looking up to Matt because he was like in the local circuit, he was a beast, man. So like for me, it was like, man, I want to get to that stage one day. So Matt was like my hero coming up, and then somehow it switched and flip-flopped, and then I was his hero, and then it's like, when this happened. But yeah, man, crazy times. DS was a good time though, man. Like, and yeah, those were some of the best days was that team.
That's awesome. And I love that kind of like transformation of that relationship from like you guys both looking up to each other. And I think that's one thing that's so exciting about this show for anybody just tuning in. Like this episode, we're going to have so many of those moments where we're like, wait, tell that story because that's super cool, right? So I love that. But at the top of the show, take us back to the beginning as we see, obviously, Sammy Smith jumping in the comments, the Daniel Sterling, all caps. But take us all the way back. How did the martial arts journey start for you? Because I have to assume it wasn't sport karate first. That's a secondary thing for most people. So how did it all get going?
My story's probably different than most, right? Like, so I started martial arts when I was like 6 or 7. And my grandfather, he watched like old kung fu movies all the time. So like I was down there with him and we were just watching these movies and I didn't really think nothing of it. We were just watching movies. That's what we did. And so one day I told my mom I wanted to go to karate school, but we couldn't afford it at the time. So I was like, all right. So I just started going in the yard and I just started doing everything I saw on TV. So, and there wasn't a lot of crazy stuff back then, right? Like you think about TV now, like all the stuff that like you see on the circuit, they're doing in movies. But like back then, no, none of that was happening. So like, a jump 360 was like cutting edge at that point in time. So like everything I saw, I was just mimicking and just learning and learning. And then later in life, probably not until I was like 15, 16, did I actually get into a martial arts school. And me and my friend Kai, we actually got into this self-defense school. And so if you go back to like 95, Empire State, right? You will not see me do forms, but you will see me on stage doing self-defense, getting the crap beat out of me. You'll know it's me because my braids and I'm flipping all over the place. But that is kind of like, that was my segue into like sport karate. It was not like, oh, I saw forms and I wanted to do that. It was like, no, I didn't even know forms existed because like we barely did kata in our school, right? We just did self-defense all the time. So probably like I taught myself until I was like 15, 16. And then we did that, right? And then from there, we started going to competitions everywhere. Like we were in Puerto Rico doing stuff because my instructor's originally from there. We were in Florida a lot. So that kind of got me into doing forms. And I was like remixing traditional forms because I could do all these tricks, right? Or I wouldn't say tricks back then, right? They were more like just more advanced kicks and some gymnastics. So I was taking traditional forms and like, okay, instead of doing this boring punch section here, I'm going to flip. And then that kind of transitioned. And then next thing I knew, I met the Tousant Brothers. This is real, like not many people will remember these guys, but these guys, they were competing in NASCA before I even knew what NASCA was. And these guys, they're a set of brothers, and their dad took them all over the place doing the circuit and whatnot. And me and my friend were doing our forms at local tournaments and whatever, and he liked what we did. So then he started inviting us to train with them. And so we started learning stuff from them. I'd probably say around this time I was still an underbelt. So I was probably like a green belt still around this time. And that's when one year I went to Empire State Nationals and that was it. So I went there and I was in the underbelt room. So I still didn't see anything, right? Because I was there waiting for the rest of the team to get there so we could do the self-defense thing because that was still what we did. I was trying to do other stuff because I could. And I passed the black and blue booth and I saw the 95 Carmichael Simon Bluegrass Nationals form. And that was it. That was it. I was like,
the perfect first form to see, right?
Like, what is this? I've never seen anyone do anything like this. I didn't know it existed in the world, right? At that time, like, I thought I was a badass, man. Like, I thought the jump, spin, hook, and tornado kick was like the moves, right? And then there's this guy doing 720s and butterfly twists and stuff. I didn't know what these things were at the time. So I saw that, and I bought the tournament video from those guys. And that tournament ended. I didn't stay for the nighttime show or anything like that because it was like before the team had won any self-defense stuff. But so I went back home and I showed my friend and I was like, yo, we gotta start learning this stuff, man. So I learned the 540 like in like 2 minutes. And then after that, it was just slow progression, right? Like we were doing so many locals. So I started seeing this stuff more and more and more. And it wasn't until from like 16 to like 18, 17 really, that I really started to like see that there was this other world out there. So then from there, every time we went to like a NASCAR tournament, because we had Empire State we could get to. So and the next year we would do that. And so I went straight to the black and blue booth. I pulled up a chair. Wally gave me the remote, and I just watched everything. Everything. I'm just there with the remote. Like if you were coming up to that booth and you know how they had the television out and they'd be like showing clips. No, I ran that booth, man. I just sat there like, what else you got? What else? And I'm just watching tournament after tournament after tournament after tournament. And because that's all I had, right? That was my only access to it. And then through the local circuit, I got, exposed to more of these guys, just kind of like, because like from locals, I started to like, okay, well, now I'm 18, I can drive. Then it was like, all right, I'm going to go to Ocean State because that's not too far. And then it was like, oh, okay. And then I started to get into that world, and a ton of breaks along the way led me to being able to travel the circuit. A lot of different people helped me on the way. Like, honestly, if I told my full story, like, you wouldn't have enough time on an episode, man. Like we need like a whole catalog for me to go through it all because there's so much that's happened, man.
That's awesome.
But yeah, that's how I got from regular not knowing anything to sport karate.
And what I love about that is I feel like there's this misconception now because so many people who rise to be these great sport karate competitors, you hear the stories of, I started training when I was 4 or 6 or whatever, right? And so to hear the story of kind of a late bloomer by necessity, because you weren't exposed to it until later, right? Definitely. Hearing that story, I think is really inspiring to a lot of other competitors that like maybe you're somebody sitting at home watching this episode right now and you're 16 and still haven't made it out to a NASCAR tournament. And you think, well, I'll just watch it on YouTube forever. But no, like you really can make that dream come true and make it happen regardless of where you start at. That's always there. And then I also love just the idea that like your first exposure to NASCAR was you being thrown around as a self-defense guy. And the next thing you know, you're a top forms and weapons competitor, right? So you talk about these kind of checkpoints throughout your career, always wanting to represent Paul Mitchell, but representing great teams along the way. Obviously, Straight Up's another all-time great franchise. Teams that are persisting to this day. It's funny you mentioned black and blue, by the way, because Wally's still doing the same thing. I just saw him at U.S. Open, TV screen at the booth, playing old tournaments from the late 90s and everything. So that's still super cool. But take us through once you were there and once you were in it, you were traveling NASCAR. Take us through that timeline of some of those career highlights, whether it was getting on Straight Up, making the move to Paul Mitchell, as well as just the big individual wins or like the first time you hit your 720 in a form or won the Bluegrass or whatever it may be.
Man, it's kind of like this, right? Like I did so many competitions to get to the point where you knew who I was, right? Like I was sometimes competing at 2 tournaments a weekend. I mean, I was like NASCAR circuit was nothing. That was just like, okay, well, there's like 10 tournaments or, whatever back then. Like, I was competing like 50 times in a year. Like that was nothing. Wow. I was competing all the time, like, because I was like, I've got to get out there, because that was really my experience with it. It was like, if I'm not getting out there, then I'm not. How do I know what I need to get better at, right? Because if I went off of what I knew back in '95, I thought I was like the best thing ever, and all I knew how to do was like a tornado kick, right? Then I see a 720, and I'm like, oh yeah, I don't know anything. So, I didn't like my first full year on the circuit probably didn't even come to like '99. I want to say, it wasn't until I got on Straight Up that I even compete full time on the circuit. That was like the first time where I was like in a position that I could. So, you got like 95, 96, 97, 98. I was just like whatever I could get to, right? So it was like maybe 2 or 3 tournaments a year. Like my first full year on the circuit probably didn't come until 99, 2000. And I was a fan. So I wasn't even like, yes, I wanted to be those guys, but like I was a fan. Like at that point in time, you gotta remember, like when I started, I was an adult. So I didn't come up in juniors. Like I was an adult when I was like someone that you might want to watch. So I had David Douglas in my division, Mike Chat in my division, John Valera in my division. You know, I had like the gods of the sport. Like, yeah, those guys were like, I had to like see them every tournament. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, it's so crazy because like that was such a big part of my journey, right? Was like being close to those guys, becoming friends with them, learning from them, you know, guys that like I saw in the Black and Blue videos thinking these guys, like in my eyes, these guys are celebrities, right? And then it's like, oh, well, I could talk to John. I could talk like John probably didn't realize this, but like when I first started, when he was like he was on his way out as I was kind of on my way in, you know, like he was transitioning to like, you know, doing movies and stuff. Like the moment I saw John walk into the hotel, like I followed this dude around, man. Like I was his shadow. He just didn't know it. But I was like, listen, like if this guy's stretching, I want to know how he's stretching. If he's warming up, I want to see his warm up. You know what I'm saying? Like, what is this dude doing? Like, because that's all I had. And then I would probably say it wasn't. I mean, I don't even know if I won anything in like in that period of time of like straight up, like probably like towards the end of like my straight up run, like towards the end of that. So we're probably talking maybe 99, 2000. Like I was like known competitor at that point, but I don't think I was really winning NASCAR tournaments at that point in time. Like it probably was like the end of Mike, like when Mike was like done with it, you know. John was still around, so like I had to go against him. David was kind of like here and there at that point because he was doing movies too. But me and David were, you know, David was like a brother to me at that point in time. So anyway, by the time I had won my first tournament, I want to say it was Empire State. And it was a year when they split the Grand from traditional to open. I can't remember the exact year right now, but it was one of those years. And I think that was my first like Grand. It wasn't my first time winning because at that point I think I was one of the guys to watch. You know what I'm saying? Like I was one of those guys people wanted to see. So yeah, man. But there's so much. It's all rumbling through my head at the same time too. So it's all like coming back to me and hitting me.
Well, I want to pick up on one part because you mentioned like you came into it as an adult and you weren't a known competitor, but then you get this big break with Straight Up, and anybody that's been around the sport knows that Joe Greenhall has a knack for these things, right? And like finding that talent and then helping to develop it. So how did that go? Was that really like Mr. G noticed that you were a talented competitor and said, "Hey, come over here. Let me talk to you," right? Like how did that go?
Well, there's a story on that one. There's a story to everything, man. The problem you're going to have is I remember a lot of this stuff. So like every time we talk about something, it's like, oh yeah, that connects to that. And it's like this big spider web. But so I was on Karate Cares and it was around 98, 99. And you know, just I started doing Crane circuit, right? And so Crane is predominantly New England. Right. So I was driving to New England like every other weekend, sometimes every weekend, depending on how the circuit fell, right? Because 90% of those tournaments were up this way. So I saw Straight Up all the time. All like, you know, like again, at that point, it was probably like 10 NASCARs or something like that. But I saw these guys every other weekend. You know what I'm saying? So like, and you got to remember back then, they had the big boom box. So they were one of the only teams playing music. Like if you wanted to play music, you had to go through them, right? So I think
they even had a T-shirt that had the boombox on it, right? At one point,
probably. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised. So I met them all through that, right? Like at the time, like a lot of people didn't notice, but Straight Up was a school, you know, like it was a team, but it was a school, you know, like if you went to Straight Up, the school, you were a team member, right? So you got that was your normal uniform. Besides back then when Joey was wearing the sequence tops, a lot of people don't remember that, but or the big ponytail, but I remember it all. So through that, we saw each other a lot, and Joe and Hugh Smith approached me at one point, and they were like, "Hey, man, if you come to our team, we can help you with this, we can help you with that." And at that point in time, I didn't go to most of the tournaments. I only went to the locals that I could get to because I could drive, right? And then just like the 3 NASCARs, like maybe Capital. I don't even know if I went that far. Probably did, but I don't know. I don't remember. And whatever. So I wanted to get out there. I wanted to compete more. I wanted to, do the other tournaments and all this stuff. And so I said yes to them. I got on that team, and I ended up moving to New England, and that was the changing point right there. So like the Daniel Sterling that like everybody knew at that point changed because I had access to train all the time, and so that's what I did. Like I shared a room with Joey, and I had a key to the studio, and they lived like around the corner from the studio. So anytime I wasn't teaching a class or doing a private, like I was in there training. And so all the stuff I didn't have a chance to work on, I had a chance to work on because I just had access to a gym where I could just train all the time. And so that's what I did. And at that point, I had learned enough to get better, to make a difference in myself, right? I learned about how I could make my basics better. Because I kept hearing like, "Oh man, you got to work on your basics." What are you talking about basics? Like, what do you mean? Even like later in my career, like I'd have like certain judges I would talk to and be like, "Hey, like you saw something, you gave me the score for a reason. Like, what is it you saw?" Like I would be picking the judges' brains after every tournament and stuff. But now I was able to go back, get in front of the mirrors and apply it. So that straight up thing was like, if it wasn't for that, I would never have gotten to the point where, I became what I was. Never, because I just would have never had the access that I got from being on that team. And then ultimately moving out there and doing that whole thing.
That's awesome. And that's one thing that I love. Like I talk about Joe Greenhall all the time on this show because I've got so much respect for the guy because you're not the only one who has a story like that, who's like, hey, the opportunity that I got was straight up that Joe Greenhall gave me that propelled me in my career. You know what I mean? I even remember I was never on Straight Up, but like just having Joe being the guy who made my bows. And the advice that he would give me, like that had an impact on my career. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I always try to give him a shout out and highlight him whenever we have the chance to. So you have the opportunity with Straight Up. You kind of realize that you know what you're doing. You learn how to get better, and then you eventually get to be one of the top competitors. So 2-part question. Talk about that transition going from being the fan that was like competing alongside these guys that you idolize to then being one of the top guys and now new people coming up that idolize you. And in that same vein, who were some of your rivals in what many would consider your prime?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it wasn't a crazy transition. Like it was a sudden transition, right? Because Mike, like you had Mike, you had John, you had David, right? And then David started doing movies. John started doing movies. Mike stopped doing that. He started his camp, right? That camp was big for like I was at the first camp chat. I was there. Like that was big. That was like game changing, that one. But those guys were moving on. So it was like I was getting better at a time where they were just transitioning. So in the beginning, sure, those were my rivals, but then we became friends, and then it became more kind of like a passing of the guard type of thing. And then honestly, I hit a window. There was a window of time where like it was just my window. There was no real. All of the other better competitors were juniors, right? So all of the guys that would eventually become competition for me were like juniors. So there was a window of time where, man, I was just the guy, I was I was the guy, because, and you got to think about like all the guys that were my competition were kind of like me years ago, right? Like they were coming up behind me, right? The only other guy that was really big competition for me then was Kim Doe, and he wasn't even competing all the time, right? Like he wasn't competing all the time. So
now, who were some of those juniors at the time? Were we talking like Jimmy Pham, maybe like a super young Matt? Like
yeah, like all the guys that like. Well, I mean, if you're not old school, you probably don't know Jimmy, right? You don't know about Jimmy Pham. Like, I mean,
which is a shame.
It's a travesty when you really think about it, like, because like like the older I get and the more I think back, like even for myself, like if I had my mind now back then, I'd have been a beast, man. I'd have been so much better than I was if I knew the things, if I had my adult mind coming up as a kid, right? And like, yes, I was an adult, but like, you know what it's like to be good. You gotta like commit. So like, I ate, slept, trained. That was my life coming up in the circuit. There was, I wasn't in school. I was, I didn't have to work like a normal job because I was doing seminars and all this stuff. So like, that was my life back then. So I gave up normal everyday life to be that guy, right? So I was still young, much younger minded at that point in life. But yeah, so there was just a window of time where I just kind of fell into being the guy because I was ready at that time, like that straight up year happened probably, like 99. And after that, it was kind of like, you only saw John once in a while. And then when John competed, he only does one division, right? And that was at a time when we started adding more divisions. So I didn't really, it was sometimes I never competed against John unless we were like runoffs or something like that, right? And so if John wasn't there, right, you had me. I mean, you had like most of my competition came from the other divisions in the finals. Like me winning my division was almost like a certainty at a certain point in my career. It was almost like, okay, yeah, I'm not going, like I'm already thinking about the finals when I get here, right? It was kind of like that for a while. And then I always had fans. So people looking up to me wasn't like this new thing to me, because it was kind of like, back then the nighttime finals was a show. Yeah. Like it was a competition second and a show first. Mm-hmm. Right. So like people would come up to me and be like, Daniel, are you going to be on stage tonight? And I'd be like, yeah, why? And he was like, yeah, because if you're not on, I'm not going to watch it. I'm going home. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't know it was like that. You know what I'm saying? Because for me, it was just like, man, I'm going to be on stage. I'm going to be on stage. That was the goal, right? It was like, I saw Carmichael on stage. I'm going to be that guy on stage one day. Like, and then so whatever. And then, I always had Matt, who was always younger than me, although we were doing this together, like we were side by side doing this. Like I was training, Matt was training. I was traveling, Matt was always with me. Like, I wouldn't, when we started doing international stuff, they were like, Daniel, we want you to come and do this. I was like, cool. Matt Emig, right? Yeah, I'm gonna need him to come with me. It was like that. Like we were a package deal. We were a package deal, pretty much straight on. So, and
did y'all get on JPM at the same time, or was it separate?
Yeah, man. I don't know if he told that story, but it's a crazy one.
Hey, go for it.
So, what happened was Steve Babcock calls me one day, and no, I don't know. We didn't get on at the same time. We didn't get on at the exact same time. No. What happened was I got on the team, right? I remember it was US Open, and I got my team, and I'm doing my thing, and I'm, it's like the Friday before, and I'm just getting ready and whatever, and then I get a call in my hotel room, and I didn't answer. Someone else answered, and they were like, Daniel, Steve Babcock wants you to come to his room, and I was like, what? Like, for what? And they were like, I think they're gonna put you on a team, and I'm like, you're lying. Because like at this point, I kind of like, I didn't give up on it, but I kind of did because I had my own team. So it's kind of like, man, we're having fun, whatever. So I'm running through all of the Coronado Springs, right? I am trying to find this guy's room. I get to the room, and everybody in the room already knew because I walked in the door and I see Casey and everyone, and they're looking at me like, you know, like giving me the head nod, and I'm just like, what is happening? It was such an odd time. But anyway, so fast forward to Matt. I get a call from Steve, and he's like, so Daniel, we're thinking about putting Matt on the team. And I'm like, yeah, like, okay, whatever, you know, like it's Matt, like duh, this is a no-brainer, right? And they're like, but we want you guys to do team forms. And I'm like, huh? Because like we've never done anything together that I guess that would be of note. Like when I think back on it, yeah, we actually did a ton of stuff together because we were always a package deal, right? Like we did everything together coming up. But then, but at that time, it was like a team forum, like what, you know? And we didn't have. It's not like today where there's you got all this history of team forums now, right? You could easily like look stuff up and figure something out. Like we had very little to go off of. So I'm like, okay, I mean, I guess we could do it. So then he's like, well, listen, we really like Matt. We want to put him on the team. But if you're not going to do team form with him, we're going to wait. And so I'm like, okay, well, yeah, no, I'll do team forms with him, whatever. I'm like, I'm not going to be the reason he doesn't get on today. So that he would have,
and for context, people don't realize this, but the team division happened because of Paul Mitchell. Like it was Julie Thorwald. The way that I understand the story, it was Julie Thorwald's idea to make sync a division and bring it to the U.S. Open because she thought it'd be good for TV. And that's why at all these night shows where people probably hear it and then kind of like squint one eye like, what? And then they don't think about it. When they say the team Paul Mitchell synchronized division, it's not because there's a Paul Mitchell team competing in it. It's because Paul Mitchell literally sponsored the creation of that division. And so I feel like a big part of the reason why Steve would have so heavily wanted you to be doing sync with Matt and why that was a differentiating factor and do we wait or do we put him on now is because of how important that division has always been to the team. But anyway, pick it up from there.
Yeah. So, I mean, no, that's pretty much it. That's how we got on. And again, like, you know, I mean, Matt was great at the time. So, I mean, they were like, you know, we're going to put him on, but I don't even know if like, because I know our first time doing team forums was like Ocean State. So I don't know if it was like, we want to have you guys doing this by the time US Open comes around. I don't know how that, you know, I don't know what their thinking was behind why it had to have been then, you know, but yeah, that's how that all happened.
Yeah. And I love the fact that that was at US Open because you talk about running through the Coronado. Was that before you competed or was that after?
It was before. Yeah.
Okay, this is wild.
Many people. It was literally, I think I must have competed the same day, like that, like later that evening. I had to have because it was Friday. Yeah. So I'm running around, you know, because I got there early or even I might have gotten there the day before. I don't know. But I got the call. I'm running around, whatever. I'm getting my uniform for the first time, all this stuff. Hey, you stop your whining. You're like 2 pounds. No one's fair to you. So, yeah, and then that was crazy, right? Because it's like you got all these emotions going through, like I did it, like I finally got on this team, and
well, the reason I think that's so crazy. What year was that? That was
it was probably 2001.
2001. Okay, 11 years later, they turned around and did the same thing. So when I got the call. It was Friday morning of US Open, and it was, hey, like, we want you on the team tonight. Like, come to this room and get your uniform.
Yeah.
I had never, like, I just assumed that had never happened to anybody else. Because, like, most people, you've got, like, a few months' notice before your next tournament because you got to get your uniforms and everything. So to know that somebody else got the call, like, at US Open and competed in the uniform that night, that's just wild that happened not once but twice.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That was a crazy day. It was a crazy day.
So we've been talking about Matt and how you guys were a package deal. So Matt talked about when he was on this show about, him kind of being your little brother, and that's kind of how the team wanted it and everything. So we've talked about that dynamic a little bit, but just take us through like that relationship with Matt, how it got started in the first place. Obviously, you guys both New York guys, or maybe even just share another story from those times if you want to.
Sure. I mean, I got more than you want to hear, man. I got more than you. Half of Matt's life I was a part of. So Matt, I met Matt. He must have been like 9 or 10 when I met him. And he was the Chuck kid, right? He was the kid who did Chucks, right? He was already backflipping with Chucks back then. So I would see him at anything in Long Island. So anytime we would compete in Long Island or would do a show in Long Island, I'd always see his school, and he'd be doing demos with them, right? And then obviously when he was competing, I'd see him compete. And this was back in the day. So after we would do our thing, we would just chat, whatever. Like he was a fan of mine, I was a fan of his, and we just literally like that seamless. It was like we went from like knowing of each other to like our lives just never unentwined from there, right? Until we were like much older in life. And the whole Big Brother thing kind of came from Camp Chat that first year. So he got on Team Chat, and they wanted him at the camp, and his parents couldn't go. So Mike calls me and is like, would you mind? Like I was already planning on going. So Mike was like, hey, would you mind booking your stuff with him and coming with Matt, right? Because like we need, he was too young to fly by himself at that point in time. And so that was that. Like literally from that day on, anytime we went anywhere, it was like a given. Like, all right, me and Matt are going. We're sharing a room. He doesn't go anywhere without me, type of thing. It just happened. It was kind of crazy, but like we kept doing all these things where it was like we'd be away for a long period of time, and so it just organically worked itself out, and we were so cool. And we were going through the same thing at the same time. Just he was a junior, I was an adult, and how I became this mentor figure of his, I don't know, honestly, because again, I was always looking up to him as well. I mean, he was still doing stuff that nobody was doing from like the time people knew about Matt. He was doing stuff nobody was doing till today. If he really wanted to, he busts out some stuff that no one's ever seen before with those trucks, like that's him. So it's kind of crazy. And yeah, so that's how that all started. And then, I mean, we were just always so close. Like I've spent the night at his house numerous times. He spent the night at my house numerous times. We've traveled the world. Most of the international stuff I've done, he was right there with me. So,
that's awesome. And that's what's so special about sport karate is that, like, admittedly, we are big fish in a small pond when you get to the top of the sport. But the friendships that you create as you get to go, like in our generation, it was Ireland and Budapest. For you guys, I know it was like France and Austria, right? So just like getting those experiences with your teammates is like the best thing about it. And we talk about your role as a mentor that also extended to some even more modern competitors. And this is the perfect segue to talk about a disciple of Matt Imig's, a disciple of yours, Sammy Smith, who's been very active in the chat this episode. Shout out Sammy. But speak a little bit to how that relationship started. Obviously, she was training Chuck under Matt. So did you guys kind of get introduced through all that? And then, of course, like not many people realize this, but I always thought it was super cool. Like Sammy competed for probably a full year of her career, if you put the tournaments together, wearing your belt, right? Which I think is the coolest little historical tidbit ever. But so tell us just about that relationship with Sammy.
I mean, that came out of the blue. I believe it was US Open. And this was back like she was, I don't even know how young, but she was like tiny young, right? And she was wearing the XMA uniform, the sleeveless one, right? And I saw her practicing in a hallway, and actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think it was US Open. I'm thinking of the scenery when I saw her. I think it was a different tournament. But anyway, And whatever, I saw her practicing, and I think her parents had asked me like what I thought of what she was doing, and whatever, I gave them some tips, and then kind of just didn't think much of it. Next thing I know, we're doing private lessons, right? Because we're all in New York, and that's how that all started. And then it just kind of never stopped, like so. From that moment on, like it went from like a couple of sessions to like I saw her like all the time, on a regular basis. And yeah, now I'm like now all our conversations are about real life, like school and like what to do after school and all this stuff. So like, yeah, oh, Bat of Atlanta, yes, that's it. Yeah, that's it. But yeah, great. Like, I mean, it's crazy when you think about people like her, like how long I've known them, right? It kind of helps me keep track of my own martial arts life, because it's like, most of her martial arts life of being known, because she was like well known, I'd say, even from green belt, because they had her on stage just doing demos, right? Because she couldn't, you had to be a black belt to be on stage and compete, right? So she wasn't at that point. I think even at green belt though, they were just like, well, we want her on stage, so can she just do a special demo and stuff, like, crazy stuff. Crazy.
That's awesome. And yeah, that's the crazy thing when we talk about these timelines, is that like, even though Sammy has still competed within the last year, like she's an old head. Like Sammy was known.
Yeah.
Sammy was known when I started. Like when I started competing, my first NASCA event was 2006 Bluegrass. Yeah, 2006 Bluegrass. Okay. And like Sammy had already been that green belt on stage doing demos before that. And so like when I came on the circuit, Sammy was already a name, which probably makes Sammy feel really old. So sorry, Sammy. Anyway, so talking about the Sammy topic, because Sammy and I talk all the time about current issues in the sport and like the state of the sport and all that. And actually, the idea to have you on this podcast came from Sammy. Yeah. So shout out to Sammy for that. But one thing that she mentioned that you and her had discussed was the difference in divisions back in the day, and how like something about how you had to like pick one weapons division to do. So give us a flashback and tell us about what that was like, and choosing your one division that you were going to do.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to go back. So I'm not sure if you had to only pick one like around the time that I came out, but there wasn't as many, right? There's probably half as many divisions then as now. But when you think about it, can you think about like, because again, I came up watching that 95 year, right? Like I everything 95, I started watching, and then I went back a little further. But, now I've seen it all. But at that point in time, John did one division. Mike did a division. David did a division, right? Or if you go back, Carmichael did a division, right? Not David, maybe they were competing at the same time, but Carmichael was beating David, whatever the case may be, right? So the people you saw on stage were kind of always the same, because they were always the cream of the crop, right? But they only did that one, right? And I know for a while, like the option to do more divisions came much later, because I've never done 5 weapons divisions in a tournament, or like I would never do it. Like for me personally, like at the most I've ever done is 2 forms divisions. At a competition, and then 1 weapons. No, I have no interest in doing a form that many times. But I always missed that once it got to this point, because it was like when you saw these guys on stage, you might not have saw them in the day. So this was your one shot to see them. You think about a form now, you might see that same person do that same form 5 or 6 times before you ever see them on stage. Right? If they ever get there, you know what I'm saying? Why people do that, I don't know. Like, it's whatever. Like, I know when it first started happening, a lot of the adults that were top competitors, they did it for the money. They were like, oh, I can, because we were getting paid $100 a division. So wait, I could just win all these and end up with 500 versus 100. And then I got a chance at the finals. And then you also limit your competition in the finals. So like, I got it, but I was never into it. I only did it. At the most I ever did was like 2 divisions. So that was something that was really different back then. Another thing that the biggest difference between then and now for me is that everybody on stage had their own thing, right? Like you can't compare John to Mike, right? And if you really look at this that bluegrass, right, where you had Mike, John, and Carmichael, they did not look the same. You know what I'm saying? Like John had his own thing, Carmichael had his own thing, Mike had his own thing. And even if you think later, right, when you think about the guys that you always had to watch out for, you knew they were going to be on stage, or like they were always the guys you saw, right? So if you go a little further than that, you got Mike and John, and then you got David, right? Like, again, polar opposites of each other, but like, and in some ways complementing each other, but they were so different from each other. And like today, I feel like, especially with forms, like more forms than weapons, because weapons, you've got 1,000 options and people are doing all this stuff that, you know, they allow to happen now. But like, if you've seen one form, you've kind of seen them all, right? Like they all kind of look the same. And I know that there's differences. I'm not blind. You know, half of this stuff that you guys are doing now, we did 10 years ago. It's nothing, you know, it's nothing I haven't seen before. But like the essence of these forms is kind of like, it's like everyone had the same blueprint. And it's like, you know, well, I'm going to change that about it, right? I'm going to change that about it. And obviously, you know, the hands are different and stuff like that. But that's why I don't watch the sport unless Sammy's like, hey, can you check this person out and tell me why you think I lost to that person, or what do you think I'm doing different from this person, or whatever. Unless she messaged me about something, I don't watch it anymore. I've got no animosity towards it or anything like that. I'm just kind of like, I'm so far removed from sport karate that it's just kind of like, man, I got other problems. So you know, that's been my focus. But yeah, man, I just think like if you talk to anyone from like my era or before, you know, they're gonna feel a certain kind of way about things now. And I might be dating myself, or I could sound old, or I could sound whatever. I don't really care, okay? Because like when you think about to me, like the gods of the sport, right? Like the Johns, the Mikes, the Carmichaels, the Jimmys, the Caseys. Like you think about these guys, right? They still, like when I think about it now and I look back now, like they still didn't get the just due for how good they really were. Like they were so much better than we appreciated, you know, at that point in time, because we wanted to beat them, right? Like, you know, but when I think back and when you know, especially seeing like all the changes in the sports, and when I really think back, man, like those guys, like God tier, right? You got God tier, and then you've got like I'm not on God tier, man. Like I had my run, and I was a part of a lot of special things, but like those guys are like God tier to me. You know what I'm saying? Like I watched some of Matt's interview, and he was talking about his top 5. Like, man, let me tell you, great. Like Carmichael will always be up there, because like if it wasn't for Carmichael, there'd be no Daniel Sterling. Like I would have never done sport karate if it wasn't for Carmichael. Like that one form literally changed my entire life. John, Mike, I wish Mike had stayed longer, because I feel like if Mike had stayed longer, his influence would have had more of an effect on a certain group. You know, because John stayed so long, everyone just bottlenecked and like started wanting to look like John, you know? So like if you think about the styles from like back in the day to now, everyone's more John than Mike. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, you're right. I've never thought about it that way. That's crazy. And you can see it from year to year too. Like you look at Jimmy Pham, you look at Rudy, and then you like keep going. Like you see a lot of the John Valera still in that. That's crazy.
Yeah. And you gotta think about like Carmichael, like he went to adults, was a phenom, and then just stopped. Right? Yeah. Like he didn't compete as an adult for a very long time. Like most of his career was a junior, right? He just came to the adults and was just like that damn good, you know, and he just flipped the script, you know. It was like, well, everybody knows Carmichael's good, but then, you know, it's like he changed the whole landscape of forms with that 95 form, right? Like, you know, And you even think about like this used to get to me towards the end of my career, like the crowds. Like if you watch that crowd from that bluegrass form, one massive, like so many people watching that form, but they lost their minds watching that form. And even the crowd these days is kind of numb. They're kind of like, seen it. Like that was good. That was great even, right? Like these kids are doing stuff that I can't do. Like I wouldn't even attempt it. But when you think about that, like even the crowds aren't as into the sport like they were in those days, you know? Like it was a different time. So like, yeah, there's a lot of my like generational bias. But I think if you really watch it, you come to my side too. You could be kind of like, yeah, he's kind of right.
I was about to say, like you say there's generational bias, but like I'm right on the same page with you, right? So I've got a controversial opinion, but first I want to address, I love your earlier point about how back then night shows were a show first and a competition second. And you talk about how everybody kind of had their one division that they did, and whoever it was that was winning that division, they owned that division, right? Yeah. And part of that mentality is that everybody wants the show to be the best show possible, where it's all the best against the best. But what happened after you had that generation where they were getting paid $100 for every division win, so everybody did everything because they wanted to take their $100, there were people that were through and through hard style martial artists throwing on silks and doing a kung fu form, even if they didn't know what they were doing, just trying to get the $100, right?
Hey, I did it. So I did it before. I didn't put on silks, but I have done the wushu division just because no one else was doing it. And it was like, yo, I will sign up, you know, and I was sponsored. So it's not like I paid for the division. So it's like, hey, that's $100, man.
Right. So there was that generation where like everybody did everything because if it's for $100, I'm going to do a form. Right. But then after that, that is where I feel like the mentality shifted, because for me and my generation, the mentality behind, because like I always did every weapons division that I could compete in. Right. And the mentality behind that was, I want to try to knock off the other guys from even having the chance to get to the stage. Right. And because of that culture, it was on stage. It was never show first, compete second. It was always, I'm going to do what it takes to win. And if it winds up that I got to throw the kitchen sink and this crowd's going to go crazy, then if that's what it takes to win, that's what I'm going to do. But I'm going to leave here with the trophy first. And I think that is a huge difference in like the way that people select their divisions, the way that they select what form they're doing on stage. I think that's a huge difference. But getting back to, this is the controversial opinion. Controversial opinion that I've never voiced on the podcast because I've always bit my tongue because I know as soon as I say it, people are going to not like it. I think that swing throughs ruined the forms division. And here's why. Okay. Because if you look back at those forms from the late 90s and the early 2000s, because in early 2000s, you were getting swing throughs. You were getting gainers. I don't know when the first cork was done, but it was stationary. It was J-step cork and then right back into the hands, right? And you can put a J-step cork anywhere in the ring that you want to, right? And that was the way that, because the majority of tricking in the late 90s, early 2000s was kick tricking. And you can put kick tricking, whether you combo it or not, you can put that literally anywhere in the ring. Yeah. And so what happened was, as swing throughs gained more and more popularity, we started to see the format where somebody would start on one side of the ring, and then it would be backside 9, hook, touchdown raise, gainer. And then backside 9, hook, touchdown raise, cork. And that was the progression. And that was okay when it was a Mark Canonizado with a maybe even like a backside 10 or 12 or whatever, right? And then, you know, the beautiful B-twist round and then into a cork. And that was him against Matt that was ending with like some crazy rodeo cork variation, right? But then after that generation, we got gainer switch, gainer switch, gainer switch, gainer switch. And it became a battle of, well, who can do more of these? And that's who's going to win, right? Or who can do 4 of them and then do a double cork at the end, and that's who's going to win. And because of the nature of those swing through combos, everything was in a straight line. And so then all of a sudden, because now this is the cool new thing to do, is all these swing throughs in a row. Now everybody has this combo that goes straight across, right? And I think that that's where you get a lot of the repetition. But I am going to come full circle on that. And for the people that are like, nah, Jackson, you're just hating on the new guys. I'm going to give credit to the men's division right now, because the men's forms division right now, I do think that stylistically, the guys at the top of that division are all very different. When you look at a Salif Salih, and you look at a Dawson Holt, and you look at a Shaquan Parson, you look at a Rashad Eugene, you look at some of that Will Nevitt, you look at some of these guys that are at the top of the men's forms division right now, they do all look different from one another, even if a lot of them still do a side pass and a corner pass. Stylistically, outside of the format, I do think that there's distinguishable differences between them, right? More so than like just the hand combos different or just the tricks are different. But like the way they move, the way they choreograph, the way they perform is a bit different. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts on my swing through take and how that has kind of changed the structure of forms.
Well, I mean, it's twofold, right? So like if you look back to when swing throughs really started, right? So you think back to that year when Matt and Sammy were going at it.
Oh yeah.
Right. You think about that year, because that's it. That's the epicenter, right? Like if you think about that year. So like, you know, Matt could do swing through stuff. You had Sammy who was doing swing through stuff. And anyone else who was doing it, it really didn't matter, because those are only two that you really focused on, right? Like they owned that year. Like it was like, who's like, this battle is happening, and everyone had to be ringside to see it, right? But if you think about that, and you think about like one, they did it completely different, right? So like at the time, Sammy was doing swing through, switch on the gainers, right? Matt was going rise, swing through, right? So again, I always like Sammy knows, like I'm always about, it's, you know, this is a John Valera saying, but it's not what you do, it's how you do it, right? So like, listen, if everybody did a swing through move, no big, if they were all a different take on the swing through.
Yes.
But if you just, like, how many times do you see cartwheel kind of full,
throw a sideways lean twist?
Yeah, you know, kind of full, flick a kick in a competition nowadays. Like you see it all the time. And that's my whole point about like everybody being different. Like if you think about like in my era, like, you know, like there was biting hard, man. Like it was a thing. Like you couldn't do somebody else's thing. You couldn't do it, man. Like you were gonna get ripped apart if you did. Like it wasn't allowed. So we got to a point where people stopped really trying to create stuff, right? Like if you look at my forms, the kicks that I was doing were not the only kicks I could do. They were the ones that were going to make me stand out, that were like, okay, well, I either created it or cultivated this, or I'm doing it a different way, right? So you think about even then, we're like, of course Matt could do what Sammy was doing, but he didn't. Of course Sammy could do what Matt was doing, but he didn't. And so that's the thing, right? Like, and even when you think about like formats, right? So like, you know, that straight pass and everyone like, well, this is called the big combo, right? Everyone's got to do the big combo now, right? I don't care what you do in that combo, like it's still the big combo. Like there's other things you could do. A lot of it is fear of like, well, this is what everyone's doing, so that's what I'm supposed to do. A lot of it is that, right? Like there's a lot of times Sammy has come to me and we've come up with she's shown me stuff and I'm like, oh, you should do that in your form. And then she doesn't do it because that's not what's popular right now. And you know, there's that fear of like, well, I don't want to lose because I'm just not doing what's popular. When it's like, I've never had that mentality. For me, it was, I came up in a time where like you wanted to be different, right? You wanted to stand out, like, and I've told her this many times. I was like, listen, if you know, when we were talking about stuff like this, like if you don't like the way the direction forms are going, then be the person to change it. Like if it means that you lose, so be it. Like, but like change the game. You know what I'm saying? Because like it's the same as with everything. Like somebody started something and everyone else followed. Well, if you start a different trend, you're good. People enjoy watching you. Like, it's going to help that trend, right? It's going to help bring that different. But, think about moves that are like timeless, right? Kim Do's split kick, right? Think about that. Mm-hmm. That move is timeless. If Kim Do does that move today, everyone's flipping their absolute minds. Like, he's been doing that since he was a junior. And to the day that I stopped competing, he's still got the same freaking like crowd, noise from it. It blows my mind. But like, it just goes to show you, like, it's just something that was unique. It was so unique that it's timeless. Like, to this day, if you do that move, like, I guarantee you still get crowd noise. Like, to the point, like the Crowd Awakener, when I created that, I was like, every time Kim does that damn kick, these people flip out. And I was just so frustrated at the time. I was like, man, I need something, right? So, like, if you think about that Crowd Awakener, which was a complete accident, by the way, that it just became like, I literally just jumped in the air, had an idea, and my body just kind of leaned back, and I was like,
"That's crazy!
I think I got something, right?"
That's crazy.
And it became, people took to it. You know what I'm saying? Like, so, like, when you think about stuff like that, like these kids are doing stuff I could never do. Honestly, like, I'd be afraid I'd break my neck on the first try. But they're doing stuff like that. But it's like, so if you could do all that stuff, why aren't they like coming up with stuff that's like super unique? Like, how many things you see in competition now are just like an extra spin on this, or step a certain way and do that? Like, it's so much of the same stuff that, like, legitimately we did a long time ago.
Right.
It's just now everyone's doing it. That's also something different too about this age, right? Like, the competitors are so much more athletic than we were as a whole, right? So, like, everybody can do almost the same stuff, right? So they're doing it. Where back then, it wasn't like that, Like, I was like, like, you think about a better example than me is Anthony Atkins, right? Like, there was stuff Anthony could do that you just couldn't do. Like, that's what made him so special, was like, there's stuff Anthony can do that you just can't do. So so you got to come up with your own stuff. I think that's also a part of it, like, it's like a lot of things in life. Like, there's this evolution and there's a drawback from it. Part of the drawback in today's forms world is that, the division thing, I think, is a issue. I actually hate it. I completely hate it. But even as far as like how tournaments are run and stuff like this, I mean, listen, I've had a lot of issues with competitions my whole, like, for a long time. So some of this is just venting.
Right. I love the point.
With some promoters, let me tell you.
So I love the point that you make about the signature moves and about how for generations, right? Because that's how it was in the 90s. That's how it was in what people would consider your prime in the early mid 2000s, right? That's how it was when I was competing in the 2010s in the weapons division. It's always been that way. It's been, if you want to win, you need to do something that nobody else has thought of. And that you're right, that has changed, right? People are just adding a spin to this or adding an extra hook kick at the end of that or whatever. And I do feel like that needs to come back. And if you look at the history, like, there were people, I'll use myself as an example just because it's easy. There were people who did my bow tricks against me, but it didn't matter. Even if they did do it better than me, the judges are still going to look at it and say, oh, well, Jackson made that up. Right? Yeah, because the first time the move happens, people remember it. Like, for your entire career, people knew Crowd Awakener is Daniel Sterling's move. You know what I'm saying? And so there's an ownership, an unspoken ownership that truly does impact judging. And as competitors, speaking to everybody out there on the circuit right now, if you find that thing that you do different from everybody else, make that the focal point. And if you don't have that, start searching for it, because that's what can set you apart. And while I'm addressing the competitors of today, this is the perfect opportunity, Daniel, because Philip Brumet, he's a competitor right now. He's on Team Competitive Edge. He is the top competitor in his division. right?
Yeah.
And he says, what would be your biggest advice to a forms competitor right now? But I'm going to twist that a little because we've talked about forms and tricking this whole show. And I'm not going to disrespect your comma ability. And I need you to talk about some commas, right?
Yeah.
And Philip, one of the top comma guys out there right now. So let's take this question and let's take it specifically to commas and some of the things that you may have seen in the sport recently, whether it's stuff Sammy's shown you or what you just stumbled across, right? And talk about some of the things that you like and that you don't like and what you see and what your advice would be for how some of these comma competitors can do better.
Yeah. I mean, if we're speaking just, I'll dig into the comma thing and then I'll be a little bit more general, right? So when it comes to commas, like if you pay attention, if you followed my career, the last like year when I wasn't really serious, like in the sense like I was doing the circuit, I only did forms. I stopped doing commas completely. Because the direction I couldn't get down with anymore, right? The what I call comma juggling, I can't stand it. I can't stand it, right? No. And like it boils my blood. And I don't really blame the competitors. I blame the judges for like letting that fly, because if you had done that stuff back when like Mike and John were competing, you'd have got laughed out the building. But now today, it's like everybody's juggling commas. Throw it up, spin it behind. Like, come on, man. It's not a bow. You're supposed to do that with commas. It's a bladed weapon. If that blade was sharp, you'd lost a hand already. But anyway, when I think commas, like for me, I treated my commas like you were supposed to treat a comma, right? The same like I like bow, right? Like Casey is my favorite bow competitor, right? And even when you think about like towards the end when she started doing other things with her bow, it was never crazy like some of the stuff you see now where it's like not. And again, I've got nothing against throwing a weapon like bow. I have no problem with throwing. I have a problem with throwing swords. I have a problem with throwing commas. I have an issue.
But I think that is the problem, right? Like the bow competitors doing more and more releases, and like everybody who watched this show knows, obviously I was part of that problem, right? But that's what the judges were giving the wins to. Like literally, what made me a successful competitor was the releases. And then when comma guys had to try to come and compete against me, they didn't have a choice, right? Like it was, well, if Jackson's going to win because he's doing all these throws, I guess that's what we've got to do.
Not true.
Right? But again, to your point, it's about what the judges are saying, right? Competitors are always going to do what the judges' scorecards are telling them to do.
Yes. If there was a time I did some interview somewhere, and there was a time where I wrote a letter to NASCA, to all the heads, right? Because, they all meet and and I wrote a letter to them because I was so pissed that they moved the goalpost and never said anything about it, right? Like you think about Mike, you think about John, right? Like as far as premier comma competitors, right? And you think about what they did and how dominant they were, even when Casey came to adults. Like her beating John, that was few and far between. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like John would and Casey is God tier to me. Casey is God tier, right? John is God tier. Casey is God tier. You think about, but John doing what John does, which is, just being incredibly crisp, incredibly strong, incredibly fast, right? But using a comma the way a comma was meant to be, beat everything, everyone, all the wushu guys, whooped them. Casey doing her thing, beat her, beating John was like a life goal because he was, it was that almost untouchable. Like it was that far away. Using a comma the way it was used. But then all of a sudden the goalpost got moved. And then you've never seen me throw a comma, do a finger roll in a form. The most that I've spun them and I've reversed them, but you've never seen me do that stuff. I don't really have a problem with the finger roll if it's done tastefully, right? Like my favorite comma competitor is actually Rudy, right? Because he rides that line where like he's doing creative stuff with that comma, but he's respecting the comma.
Right.
My like the comma juggling and even this like man, like even the sword juggling. I'm not okay with that either, right? So I'm not just saying this because I'm a comic competitor, but like my favorite sword competitor, Nick Begley.
Ooh.
To me, I don't care about what anyone did after Nick Begley. I don't care. Like Nick Begley to me with a sword, beast. That's what the sword forms were supposed to look like, man. You know what I'm saying? Like again, and there's a balance to it where like, yeah, man, I'm gonna like push the envelope, but I'm gonna like respect the weapon. I'm gonna use the weapon the way the weapon was intended. Like, tell me what's the craziest thing Nick ever did with a sword besides swing that thing so accurately that you know if you stepped in front of it, he'd cut you in half. You know what I'm saying? Like he was just that precise and that strong with it. And like, so everything else he did to it was just a bonus. But with the bow stuff, right? Like someone underrated with the bow, Nate Andrade, right?
Oh, you are preaching to the choir, my man.
The problem with Nate and why people don't know him as much, Jason.
I say, shout out JPM family.
Up? Yeah, man. One of the like Nate. The thing about Nate is that if you were around in that time, you've never seen Nate's best stuff because you needed to be competing in Crane to see his best stuff. Like Nate on Nazca is like a shell of Nate on Crane. Like when I first got into Crane, I could not beat Nate for anything. Like it took me years to beat Nate in weapons. Like back then, man, it took literally years, man. So like that dude underrated. And you think about him, like a lot of these bow tricks originated from him, right?
Oh, I say it on the show all the time. Literally 60 to 70% of all body rolls.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They came from Nate. Yeah.
All that stuff, right? But again, like if you watch his stuff and you've seen it, you know there's a line that he's riding. You know what I'm saying? It's like, yeah, he could throw it and flip it and spin and do all this stuff, but no, he tried to find ways that one, no one was doing, and two, there's a limit to it, right? It's like, okay, there's still this element of respect for the weapon. To use a damn bow the way a bow was intended. Like if I'm judging and you're doing bow in front of me, your strikes better be on point or you are losing. I don't care if you threw that thing up, did a triple back under it and caught it with your toes. You're losing if your strikes aren't on point. I don't care. You know, commas, oh man, your 7-cut better be legit or you just automatically, trust me, it's over, man. I don't care what seed you got, what uniform you're wearing. Like, I don't care, man. Like, you better use a weapon the way it was intended to be used, and that's got to be first. So weapons, that's one reason why I was just like, you know what? If this is what the judges want from commas, I just don't want a part of it. So I'm good. So I just did forums towards the last year. But to answer that guy's question about what I would say about what I would say for competitors today, man, is like, man, like one, go back and watch the tapes, go back and watch the tapes. You know what I'm saying? Like every now and then Carmichael's bluegrass form pops up in my news feed and to this day, I mean, we're in like however many years ago, right? That was decades ago. And that form still gets me to this day, man. Yeah. It's timeless. It will never get old. I don't care how many times I watch it. It will never get old, man.
That's true. That's one of those forms.
I mean, like you gotta, I don't know. Like I always told Sammy when I was training her, because she was like pretty much the last person I really trained seriously. I was like, when I create my forms and when I thought about making a forms, it wasn't like, well, what trick can I do? Or it was like, well, when I do my form, what is it I want you to feel? So what do I want the audience to feel when you watch it? What I want the judges to feel when you do it? So like the reactions I would get from the crowd, I already knew that was the reaction because I planned it that way. It was like, no, I want you to feel something when you watch my form. I don't want you to just see me doing some moves. I want you to feel something.
Yes.
And that goes back to like my day, man. It was a performance, man. Like we were getting on stage to perform, and yeah, we wanted to win, but it was a performance, and at the same time, man, like we wanted to be something. That's why, like, if you think about my era and all of even with the technology being so much further along now, you guys don't get the hype that we got, back then. Like man, we were everywhere. Like I've seen like half of Europe just because people saw me on, saw a form of mine. You know what I'm saying? Like I've traveled, like I've done so many things because of this, because it was a performance, so it wasn't about the competition aspect of it or like, oh, he's a good competitor. It was like, man, when I watch this guy, what I'm saying, like he is putting on a show. Mm-hmm. And that I feel is lost. But I felt that was lost a long time ago, personally.
Right.
Personally, I felt like that was
lost. love everything about that, because that's the purpose of what we do. Like at the end of the day, when you get on stage, even though admittedly my number one goal was to go and win, still in the back of your mind, it was, I want to do something that's going to be remembered. And fans of the show know that I say this all the time. Like the difference between good competitors and great competitors is that good competitors might win 100 overall grands, but great competitors are remembered forever. And it's because of exactly those performances, right?
Yeah.
And I love the focus on using the weapon the way it was meant to be used, because, and this was, so like everybody knows, I'm a release guy, right? Like that's what made me successful as a competitor. But I still made sure that if I was going to do the releases, number one, there were more strikes in my form than there were releases. Yeah. And number two, that I was going to be doing that striking properly, because I'm a disciple of Casey, of Mike Bernardo. I was trained by Lauren Carney. Like, I know what comes first. And there's so many kids that they'll come up to me when I'm at a tournament or whatever, and they come up and the first thing they want to learn is, Jackson, how do you do this catch? Or how do you do that throw? I'm like, forward strike, up, down, side, side, right? That's the first thing that you got to understand. And that gets lost on so many people today. I want to end the show with one more thing, because I know we're already running a little bit long, but this was another topic that Sammy cued me in on. And I think it goes back to kind of the mentality that we've been talking about the whole time and how things were different back then. And I want to bring this up specifically because we've got a lot of new blood on Paul Mitchell right now. We just picked up 6 new players, the biggest addition that we've made in a while, right? Lots of juniors on the team, which is also kind of new. It's historically more of just an adult team, right? And so we've had juniors, but never like a bigger group of juniors, other than back when there was a junior team at one point, which was a separate thing. Anyway, right? You see what I'm saying? So we got new blood on Team Paul Mitchell. And Sammy told me how you would tell her stories about how in your day, Paul Mitchell was feared to the extent that people wouldn't talk to you because they were scared of Paul Mitchell members, right? So take us back in time and tell us about what that was like.
Yeah. I mean, it was more so even before I got on. But like when I came up, I was an adult at that time. So, in that stage, like, so you got to remember too, because of the way everything I've said ties together, right? Almost everyone on stage was Paul Mitchell, right? Like forms, weapons. It was just like Paul Mitchell, geese, right? Like there weren't many players that weren't a part of Paul Mitchell. So like Paul Mitchell was like the cream of the cream of the cream of the crop, right? Like to the point, like there's not many people that at that, like, before I got on, that are not all like legends, right? Mean, what is that? I'm not mean. But yeah, man, like Paul Mitchell guys would walk into tournaments and like everyone's eyes just like shift, and like everyone's just watching them because they're like in awe of them, right? And so like the point, like my goal of being on Paul Mitchell, it started because I was like, because of that, that like one, all the guys I idolized were on the team, but it was like, man, like it was being on Paul Mitchell was like an honor above honors at that point in time. You know what I'm saying? And I'm sure for the guys who just get on it now, it's still that same way, I'm sure they feel that same way. But yeah, man, let me tell you, I've been bought off at competitions, being who I was and, and being on Paul Mitchell, right? One story in particular, I went to a competition because they had good prize money, and the promoter comes up to me and he's like, Daniel, listen, the competitors know they're going to lose to you, so they're asking for their money back. So can we just give you the grants money, and instead of competing, you just do your form and weapon and just do it like as a demo? Like, we'll give you all the money. And I was like, wait a minute. Like, you want to do what now? So you want to pay me to not compete so these other guys can feel like they have, like, and I mean, I didn't see myself on that, like, at that point. Like, I could have lost that day. You know what I'm saying? But whatever. I'm like, so I don't have to compete. I just got to do a watered down form as a demo. Yeah. I'll sign up for that. So I got paid like $1,000. And it's the most ironic thing about that was, like, 10 minutes later, Matt Cato walks through the door, and this other guy who does traditional walks through the door. I'm like, you guys were going to lose anyway. Like, you're still going to lose, but now you've got to dish out twice the prize money. Like they might have, one of those guys might have beat me. Like, I might have lost. Like, I was like, this is stupid, but you've already agreed to it. I'm taking your money, But yeah, man, like, a big part of it too was the fighters, though. It wasn't just the forums competitors, the fighters, man. Like, the fighter, like, there was a time where on Paul Mitchell, we didn't have all the number one fighters that were out there, right? Like, there was a time where we had, like, it seemed like they were a number one fighter. They were on Paul Mitchell, right? But there was a time where we didn't have all the number one fighters. And the way people looked at the team was different in that aspect as well, right? So, I mean, like, yes, I'm a forums guy, but, like, I was a fan of most of the fighters. Like, Johnny Tension is from New York, and I used to see him at all these locals, man. And just like John, man, I'd be watching this dude the whole tournament, and I knew I was getting good because one day he came up to me and was like, "Hey, man, you're pretty good," But yeah, man, I also, like, again, I don't know how it is now, but there was a time when there was a period of time where I was on Paul Mitchell, and I was kind of like, man, like, this doesn't feel like much of doesn't feel like a team. It just kind of feels like we all kind of do our thing at a tournament, and we're all representing the same team, but we didn't feel like a team. And there was definitely a point where I was kind of like, man, maybe I missed what I had with my own team. Because we were so close, because it just started with, like, this little nucleus and kind of, like, grew into whatever. But yeah, man. But yeah, like, there was a time, I don't know what it's like now. Again, I haven't competed in a long time, and I have no interest in going to a competition. There was a time, man, where, like, yeah, like, when Paul Mitchell walked through the door, yeah, man, like, people's hearts dropped. You know what I'm saying? Like, imagine being like, it's like me when I first started, but I was in such awestruck of these guys, it didn't matter. But, like, I knew I wasn't beating this dude. It's like, yeah. So the guy I idolize, that I'm out watching his video, like, yeah, I'm going before him. Yeah, like, I'm gonna get slammed, but you know what I'm saying? So it was like that, because honestly, for a time, I mean, we won everything there was to win. You know what I'm saying? Like, we won everything. And
I think that's one of my favorite things about the core that we have now, is that I got on in 2012. And so I was on, it was the year Matt retired. So I had a few tournaments as a teammate with Matt. I had a few tournaments as Caitlin's teammate, right? And so they were, and also the fighting core at that time was also an older generation, right? Alex Lane, Greg Betlock, Elias Lemon, that crew, right?
Yeah.
And so I had about 6 months to a year with that squad as the core of the team. And it had that same culture that you talked about, right? Of, like, people feared us, and there were times where everybody kind of did their own thing, right? Like, obviously, I wasn't hanging out with Matt Dimick all the time, but that's just how it was. But that's one thing I love about our current team, is more so than back then. And really, it started when the fighting team was Cam Dawson, Justin Ortiz, the Hungarians, Zolt, Laszlo, even Tomas and Richie. That is really what kind of started that culture shift where everything was more cohesive. And now, like, the team that we have now, it's like everybody like goes to meals together. We all hang out together. Like it's a very cohesive unit. That's one of the things I love about the core that's been built right now. But I love what you bring up about when people see that Paul Mitchell logo, that's the feeling they get. Because I had this experience when I first went to Martial Arts Super Show, which is Century's big convention out in Vegas. And some of our players felt that for the first time this year. And one of the messages that I want to share here on the show is that, like, when I showed up to my first Super Show as a 16-year-old or whatever I was, and guys that had been around, guys that were school owners that had been around sport karate in the 90s, right? Yeah. Who came up to me and said, you know, wow, you must be good. Nice to meet you. Can I get a picture? Right. Yeah. They weren't doing that because they knew who Jackson Rudolph was. They were doing that because they saw the logo and it brought them back to JV. It brought them back to Carmichael. It brought them back to Mike Chat. And so to everybody on the team now, just remember that when people see the logo, they think of everybody that came before you. They think of Daniel Sterling. They think of Matt Emig. If you're a fighter, they see that logo and they think of Raymond Daniels. They think of Kevin Thompson. They think of Johnny Tension, right? And that is Damon Gilbert, bleeds black and white, still the fighting coach of the team, right? Yeah. That is something that is so special about when you put on these colors, that you're not representing yourself anymore. You're representing history. You're representing the greatest franchise in the history of the sport, and that's powerful, right? So with that's my mic drop moment, right? So with that, any closing thoughts, comments you want to share? This has been awesome.
Oh, no, I mean, I feel like I've said enough. I'm gonna get blown up in the comments here and be like, man, this dude's so biased.
No. I love it. Again, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been one of my favorite episodes to ever film. Maybe at some point, what we got to do is we got to do a big show. Maybe at one of the milestones, like when we get up to 150, we do a show where we get like you, Sammy, Matt, we get like all of you on at the same time. That would be pretty crazy. But anyway. So once again, thank you so much. I'll go ahead and wrap things up here. Thank you to everybody tuning in here on Black Belt Magazine. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you hit that share button so we can keep spreading the gospel of sport karate and we can get the amazing athletes, both of yesteryear and of today, the recognition that they deserve for all the amazing things that we do in this sport. I'm Jackson Rudolph. This has been episode 110 of the Jackson Rudolph Podcast, and I'll see you next time.